This is a remastered replay of one of our most popular episodes. Enjoy. This is kind of making me angry as I'm describing it.
Me too.
These dumb people, they're very dumb people, and I say that proudly, don't understand the game they're playing. What they're doing is they're screwing the founder and they're screwing the next round of investments. So it is just a fundamentally catastrophic thing to do.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode, in-depth masterclasses about the concepts essential to building, running, and investing in Silicon Valley-style startups. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into the principles that power high-growth disruption, the same way Facebook, Google, and Uber do it. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris. I've been building brands, marketplaces, startups, and go-to-market strategies for over 20 years, including 10 years in venture-backed businesses in Silicon Valley. And I'm now helping a small handful of startups fast forward to the best high-growth outcomes as quickly as possible.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein. I'm a software engineer, operator, coach, advisor, investor, and people geek. I've worked at Google and a number of scale-ups, and am now a co-founder at Circular, a high-growth startup.
And our job on this show is to guide you through the unique mindset and approach that drives Silicon Valley-style disruption at scale.
And in this episode, we're going to continue our discussion about all things capital raising. Specifically, we're going to talk about the various forms of signaling that are involved in a fundraise, how to run a fundraising process, how to craft your ask, how much money to raise for what valuation, and how to pick your investors. So let's go. I'm really excited to discuss this one with you, Chris. Maybe we can start with talking about the signaling of fundraising, which is a really fun topic.
So signaling is a technical term for really the things about your business that make an investor stand up and take notice, either in the positive or in the negative. We talked in the last episode about team, technology, and traction. Those are kind of forms of signaling. Have you been able to attract a good team? Have you been able to attract a growing user base? Have you been able to build an incredibly powerful technology? But those are core characteristics of your business as well. There are other less core signals that you can collect to prove that your business is doing well and that is worth investing in. Yaniv, just before recording, we were talking about how your startup is in Y Combinator, which I'm sure many people have heard about already, but it is the premier, I think it's even the first, if not the first breakout startup school in the world, started by Paul Graham and very, very well respected in the world. And that's a form of signaling. If you're a new team, recent grads, and you don't have a lot of traction to your name, you don't have a lot of experience to your name, getting into YC is picking up a signal token, as I call it, a little token for your deck to say, hey, we're legit. These guys vetted us, they taught us, they trained us. We have access to their community, to their thinking. It's a little badge of honor that you can use.
That's exactly right. And, we've just finished up at YC here at Circular, and we're in the middle of fundraising. And one thing I've realized as we're going through fundraising is there are quite a lot of analogies with applying for a job. You go through this process with various investors, and first they want to see your deck where you sort of talk about all of your traction and your vision and so on. And then if they like that enough, they set up an introductory meeting and you have a bit of a chat. And if they like that some more, then you get grilled a bit. And then finally they have some sort of committee where they decide whether to offer you a term sheet, which is a bit like getting the job. And so from a signaling point of view, and if you think of something like Y Combinator, it's a bit like having on your CV a degree from a prestigious university or something like that. And, there are two things you get when you go to university. You get the actual education, but you also get that badge that says, I was good enough to be selected for this university. And also they educated me and I've learned all of this great stuff from them. So it's a shortcut, and it's very human to have this type of signaling or credentialing that makes you more appealing. That's what we're talking about here, is especially in terms of getting your foot in the door, and then also potentially at the valuation stage, which we'll cover a little bit later, having some of these signaling credentials is really valuable.
There are other forms of signals. Another one that I like very much and I find valuable if it's done right is advisors. So bringing together people who are domain experts at what you're trying to do. And the way I think about pulling together an advisory board is think about all the hard things that your startup is tackling, whether it's breaking into a new kind of market, pioneering a new kind of business model, trying to solve some kind of hard technical problem. You really want an advisor per hard problem to kind of bolster any weaknesses you might have in your team where your resumes haven't demonstrated success in that particular part of the problem. And so getting advisors on board is very useful. There are two kinds of advisors I think it's worth pointing out. There's hands-on advisors who are acting a little bit like a fractional executive. They're actually part-time operational in your business, and they might certainly earn some kind of salary or retainer and stock. But there are these very lightweight advisors where they're just checking in with you a few times a month. They're maybe helping you with introductions. They're helping you think through certain problems in their various fields of expertise. And those you can sign up with what's called a FAST agreement, which is an industry standard advisory agreement. It helps you figure out how much equity they should earn, and all the terms are all set out, and you just agree on the level they're going to participate and sign that and get it over with and collect those key advisors and add that signal to your startup.
You mentioned those two types of advisors. I think it's completely reasonable to plug your business, Chris, which is, I guess, that first type of advisory, and you're one of the best at that more hands-on, deep advice. I actually wanted to touch on that second type because I would say that's become a little bit controversial lately, not in terms of getting the advice, but whether having an advisory board of lightweight advisors is the right thing, or whether you should actually be getting that type of advice from your angel investors. It's a really interesting one. I'd like your thoughts in a moment, but the thinking goes, I think especially now when there is a lot of capital around and so many people are becoming angel investors of some sort, that rather than giving away equity for free in return for this advice, that your advisors should believe in you enough that they actually want to put their own money into your business. And then the advice you get from them comes because they want to help. They're sort of paying it forward, and also because they want the business that they've now invested in to succeed. And so I have seen people saying you shouldn't be getting advisors. You should actually be getting that sort of advice and that sort of networking from your angel investors.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like we talked about in the last episode, where if you have a very strong team and a very strong pitch and you have momentum and credibility behind you, then I think it makes sense to insist on a higher bar of participation from the people that you're reaching out to. And so, saying to somebody, oh, look, we're looking for investors, not just people to take sweat equity pieces for their advice. I think that's kind of a more bullish, more sophisticated stance to take. But I think, if you're out of high school and you're trying to prove yourself in the world and you're barely able to get a Zoom meeting with someone you admire and trying to kind of beg and plead to have them help you for a few hours a month, I think it's reasonable for your ask to be a little less ambitious and for you to try to pick up some of those early tokens as you're building momentum in your career.
As we've been talking about this, and we were talking about YC and advisors and all of these things, it reminded me how strongly this whole startup and venture capital ecosystem depends on being highly networked. Even from the university degree analogy, there is actually a third thing you get from going to a good university, which is your network, right? If you do an MBA from HBS or INSEAD, yes, you get the learning, yes, you get the credential, but you also know a lot of people who might be able to help you. And the startup world is very much like that. Who you know and who the people you know, like the second degree of separation, is so important. Now, this has some diversity and inclusion implications, which perhaps we should discuss at another time, but it's simply the reality. And so the more in that world you already are, the more you can expect. And I think maybe this discussion of choosing angels over advisors is because probably the barrier to entry has come down as more capital's become available, as more people have been angel investing. But you're absolutely right, Chris. If you're already part of this world, then you probably don't need to give away sweat equity. You should be taking the money on board straight away. But if you're trying to break in, then getting that foot in the door, giving away a bit more of your business or your time or whatever it is to get into that network is super important.
I think it's also worth touching on signals that are weak or signals that are maybe even negative. For me, and maybe this is a personal thing, but I've touched on this in previous episodes. I find a lot of founders outside of Silicon Valley very, very excited about getting validation from media or validation from government. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Yaniv, but I personally find that to be a little bit of a negative signal. I don't want to understand how great your grant writing process is. I don't want to know about your PR and comms. What I really want to know is, have you built a great team? Have you started to prove out some hypotheses? Have you built a product? Do people care? And I find those two signals either weak or if there's too many of them and you're leaning on them too hard in a pitch, I find them to be negative signals.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, the government thing, like you've mentioned this in a few of the episodes, so I feel that there's a backstory to this that I'm not familiar with, but I'll touch on the other piece, which is around publicity. I think if you are using the publicity as in itself your signal to say, look how much media we've got, then that's not particularly compelling. But PR, in my experience, can be an incredibly powerful brand building tool, both in terms of your employer brand, which is super important when it comes to hiring, which is a future episode for us, but also in terms of, especially if you're a B2C brand, getting your name out there can be really powerful growth levers. So I think the thing with PR, and one of the things that I was hearing from our group partners in Y Combinator is you should always be asking yourself, what is the goal of this PR? It can easily become a vanity exercise, and that's where it's dangerous. But if you know why you're doing that PR and you're getting traction with it and it's a deliberate part of your strategy, then I think it can be a very positive signal.
Yeah, I agree with that. If it's a methodical part of a strategy, and particularly a little bit kind of in the medium to latter part of the cycle, I think it makes a lot of sense. The situation I have in my head is these very, very young startups set up by inexperienced founders where they've managed to get on the local radio or TV network. And when they come to me and I dig in, there isn't a real product there. There isn't a real go-to-market strategy there, but they're very excited and proud of the bit of media coverage they got. And they're trying to collect more of it, or they're trying to get the grants. And I find that to be a distraction in the early days when it's not part of a methodical process. You ask about the story of grant writing. There isn't some kind of some abuse I suffered as a child from grant writers and government government employees, but it's just more. I see these founders spending hours and days. I use the phrase again, twisting themselves into a pretzel to try to fit their business into the needs of a grant written by a bureaucrat. And then once winning that grant, twisting themselves into a pretzel to fulfill the criteria of that grant. And it is a fundamentally different thing than commercial success. In some ways, I find, especially, we're most familiar with the Australian government here, the way they're trying to help is often distracting. I think that there are ways where you can kind of do matching funds with investors, to do tax optimizations, to do other things to optimize innovation in your economy. But if you are distracting founders with grant writing and bureaucratic processes, I feel like that's a problem, and it's problematic for your broader ecosystem.
Yeah, so I actually have some scar tissue around the R&D tax incentive. So I definitely know what you're talking about. And it probably goes all the way back to our first episode when we talk about the way in which tech startups and venture capitalists have this kind of symbiosis and this understanding of the type of business they're trying to build. And although a grant is non-dilutive, you don't give away any equity for it, the piper still has to be paid. You're still giving away something. And the thing that you're giving away might actually make it harder for you to succeed. So I agree it's a dangerous game and you need to tread carefully there.
Yeah, for sure. And so let's then move on to the fundraising process. I've bumped into, again, founders who are raising money, but they seem to be doing it in a fairly haphazard way, where they're reaching out to investors, they're having some conversations, but the conversations don't seem to amount to very much. And so what I like to do is really create a structure around this process and help investors understand where they are in the process and what you're trying to achieve, so that the whole conversation is a little bit more structured and a little bit more deterministic, even if that deterministic outcome is a no. So let me talk a little bit about how I recommend doing it. And Yaniv, I'd love your feedback, and I'd love to hear any variations that you have on the theme. The first thing I encourage founders to do is do a roadshow before they go and raise money. Now, there is almost a cliche in Silicon Valley circles, which is if you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money. And I'm not encouraging you to go and talk to a bunch of investors and ask for advice. What I'm encouraging you to do is go build relationships with investors before you start raising money and ask them a very specific question, which is, what do you need to see us do over the next 2, 3, 4 months for you to get conviction on this deal, on this business, on our startup? And so it's not like generally, I'd love to get your advice, but what I really want is fundraising. No, I am not raising money, and I'm not going to accept your money. I wanted to give you some understanding of who we are and what we're going to go do. And I'd like to know, on my checklist of things I'm going to go do, what would you like to see us have done? What that does is it gives you an opportunity. If you think about it like dating, it's your first date. It lets the investor get to know you, establish some context about who you are. And then the second and third time you meet them, you've hopefully done what they said or had a good reason why you felt like it was the wrong thing to do. And B, had a chance to demonstrate that you're a person, a man or woman of your word, and that you're methodical, you have notes from that conversation, you're able to hit or not the things they asked, you're coachable, you're thoughtful. They draw a line between those two dots and say, oh, I can see a trend here between this first moment and this other second or third moment. And so I find that really, really softens the ground. And then you move into the fundraising process, allowing, I would say, depending on your network and your experience and your resume and your team and your traction, I would personally allow something like 4 months to get money in the bank. Some founders can do that in 4 weeks, but if you are a first-time founder, you want to allow lots of time. You want to communicate that timeline. You want to communicate the period where you're hoping to have early conversations, where you want to be having diligence and where you want to be closing the round. And if certain investors are falling behind in that process, you want to be respectfully clear with them, which is, hey, we're a little bit further along in the process with a couple of other investors. We're really looking to have money in the bank by this date for our fundraising plan and process. And so we'd really like to catch you up and get to a clear answer over this period of time. I think a lot of founders are afraid to have that conversation. They're afraid to apply that little bit of pressure, but I think it makes you look like a more experienced, more methodical operator and actually can engender some respect from the investors you're talking to.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I especially like the idea of a roadshow, and it speaks back to everything you said, and also that importance of networking in this whole game, which is one of the things that venture capitalists, especially at the early stages, are looking at is the team. They want to know you as a person. They probably would like you a little bit. And to your point, they'd like to see that you can take feedback and turn it into results. And so you get that opportunity. And then, in terms of timing and that whole investment discussion, it's really just a specific case of negotiating leverage principles in general, right? Which is, if you're desperate in a negotiation, and for startups, desperate means you need to close the deal soon or you'll run out of money, then that will make it harder for you to succeed. But the other really interesting thing is that we talked about signaling before. So there's actually another type of signaling within the round, which is that VCs and investors are looking at what other investors are doing. And, you can be cynical and call it a herd mentality, and you could call it FOMO. And I'm sure there's an element of that, but I think there's actually a rational explanation too, right? Which is there is signal to be gotten from the fact that, if I'm an investor and I see that other investors are also interested, then that means that they've done their due diligence, they've applied their own lens to it, and they see that they like it. So if I like it, and then I see that another investor who maybe has a different lens also likes it, then that makes it seem like probably it's an even better proposition as an investment. And so you definitely get to this point where things start to heat up. And that's why it's important to have enough time and to be talking to enough investors, and definitely never to put all your eggs in one basket, because you then need to kind of bring it all together, and people are back channeling, talking to each other, seeing what else is happening. And that's the way you start to put together a good round.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
I think you touched on something very important that I didn't really talk about at all, which is the idea that you need to be talking to a lot of investors. I see a lot of founders who are talking to 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 investors. You need to think of it like a sales process, and you need to be talking to tens or hundreds of investors. Particularly if you're a first-time founder or you don't have some kind of a special advantage into this world, you need to be starting lots of conversations and then whittling it down, whittling it down, whittling it down, because otherwise you're a little bit bent over the barrel with whatever you're offered. And more often than not, you're going to be offered nothing, or you're going to be offered a really poor deal. That actually is a nice segue into the next subject, which is how to craft your ask, how to craft the question of how much are you raising for how much of your business and under what terms. We'll go through some of the key aspects of your ask, but if you only have one or two investors at the end of your process, then you have a lot less room to negotiate and control the ask and the outcome. So you really want to be very careful with that.
Let's jump into that. First thing that we wanted to talk about is, what's your ambition? And to sort of lay that out really clearly so that investors understand what it is that you will be doing with the money that you're asking for.
Yeah, so a lot of what I'm talking about is from many, many conversations from founders I bump into or advise along the way. And so that's why I go to some of these items and talk about them in certain ways, because I'm experiencing these misunderstandings personally and on behalf of founders. So the first one that I've got on our list, ambition, is, I've seen some founders with very successful companies with a lot of momentum. They're product led, they got a great team, but yet even then I've seen them constrain their thinking based on the valuation they think they can get, based on previous valuations and even some bottom up analysis of their revenue and their growth curve and things. And it just shows to me a fundamental misunderstanding of the game being played. The valuation and the kind of investors you're talking to and the kind of money you can raise in the venture world is to a degree set by the future potential of what you're doing and your ambition about how much you're going to go do. And so it's not about, hat in hand, trying to do some bottom up valuation of, 3 times revenue or some garbage like that. It's about, we're just getting started in this tactical beachhead. And you'll listen to a few of our previous episodes where we talk about starting with a tactical problem. It's like, yes, we've started in this tactical way, solving a real problem. And yes, maybe we have some revenue and maybe we have some growth, but we've also told you about these adjacencies and about this very big, ambitious thing we want to go disrupt and change in the world. And we are serious about that. Here is a reasonable, pragmatic course of action from here to there. And again, from a previous episode, you don't want to be coming across like you're boiling the ocean, but that you have serious ambitions about where this can go. And you should set your ask in terms of how much you're raising and your valuation commensurate with that ambition. And investors will do the same. I just want to encourage the audience to recalibrate their thinking from what they've learned in traditional business school around 3 times revenue and bottom-up analysis. That's not the game we're playing. We're playing a game of massive capital gains of equity growth based on speed of execution, growth rates, and massive ambition to disrupt some fundamental aspect of the world with your unfair advantage, with your technology, with your economies of scale, with your incremental cost of serve, and so on. And so the first subject I wanted to tackle here in crafting your ask is to encourage people to lift their gaze and increase their ambition in the story they're telling and in the money they're asking for.
I do agree with you there. The only thing I'd say is I'd love to completely believe you on don't fixate on multiples and things like that. In my experience, a lot of investors, and I guess when we will talk about valuation shortly, we'll talk about that. They still do think about multiples and these sort of formulas for valuation, I think sometimes to their detriment. We'll come back to signaling again, because I think it's just such a key piece that runs through all this. And this is where I get to mention that blog post that I'm kind of obsessed with, which is called VCs Should Play Bridge. So those of you who've played Bridge or 500 or Whist or any of those sorts of card games, there are sort of 2 stages to the game. One is bidding, and then there's the actual playing of tricks. And in a way, that's quite analogous to the startup and venture capital game as well, where you're playing 2 games in sequence. One is raising money, and then the other is execution, which we've talked about in a few of our previous episodes. But when you're raising money, you're in the bidding stage of the game. And there are actually multiple rounds of bidding. And we talked about seed, Series A, Series B, Series C. These things don't stand alone. These things are actually part of an interlinked sequence that good venture capitalists understand how to play in total. So if you think about when you're raising your Series A, you're doing signaling within the round, and that's what we've talked about so far as well. But you're also thinking about signaling to future rounds and how your investment is going to relate to future rounds. So if you are raising your Series A, what the investors are going to be thinking in part is, how does this raise allow them to get to a successful Series B that would allow them to get to a successful Series C until they reach that kind of escape velocity, that profitability where they're no longer dependent on outside injections of capital, and then eventually they get to an exit that gives them the multiple that they want, right? Remember that venture capitalists ultimately look after other people's money and they want to give their investors a really good return. So that's sort of, I know I'm sort of jumping around a little bit here, but we can unpack it all. Also, where the valuation piece comes in is the valuation needs to be such that future rounds give you a good multiple on a good markup, as they call it, on your investment, so that you feel like you're providing good returns to your investors. Bring it all back to ambition. Even if you're at an early stage, if you're raising a Series A, you need to be painting a picture of why at some point you're going to be worth a Series C investment at a $500 million valuation. And if you can't paint that picture, then you're not a good Series A investment either, even if all your numbers are amazing, because you need to have that vision and that horizon.
This is so important because you're touching on something that I think a lot of founders aren't thinking about. These investors are playing a game of equity growth, and you use the word multiples. And so let's talk about that a little bit. It's very important. The investor is looking at a story that they're trying to play out in their head and imagine into the future. So they're trying to look at you and look at this business and say, okay, if I invest, just let's use round numbers for the sake of argument. If I invest $1 million and I buy 20% of the company, and I'm using round numbers, and this company therefore is worth $5 million. Do I believe that that money and this team and this plan is going to get them to a place where the company will then be worth $20 million? And so someone else will give them enough money to value the company at 20 million and then get it to 100 million. And so they're looking for that equity growth along the story. And so then they sell their part of the pie. And you talked about signaling. This is another thing that I've bumped into in unsophisticated investors, and I'll use the word again, dumb money, and I'll use it very proudly here, where the investor is trying to screw the founder and say, I'll give you 10, 20, 30, 50, $100,000, and I want 40, 50% of the company. And this is kind of making me angry as I'm describing it.
Me too.
These dumb people, they're very dumb people, and I say that proudly, don't understand the game they're playing. Because what they're doing is they're screwing the founder and they're screwing the next round of investments. So it is just a fundamentally catastrophic thing to do. No follow-on money will invest if you took 50% of the company. The next investors know that that founder needs to continue to be motivated and incentivized to continue to operate the business through multiple dilution events. And if you've taken 50% up front, that says a lot about the founder. It says a lot about you as an investor, which is they don't want to deal with you. And it says a lot about what's left on the cap table for them to buy. And so you are just pissing away your money and being greedy and actually working against your best interests. And I want to say that as strongly as possible because it just makes me very upset on behalf of founders that this kind of discussion even happens, much less these kind of transactions occur.
Yeah, I'm angry too. I call this behavior shooting yourself in the foot while your foot is stomping on the founder's face. So it kind of sucks for everyone. And yeah, I've had to help some folks through this. And the thing that is sort of interesting about venture capital, and you know what, we've all seen The Social Network, and, yes, VCs can get greedy and you can get weird stuff with liquidation preferences and so on, but ultimately it's a cooperative game, right? So when you think about your equity pie, it is in some sense less important how much of the pie that you have compared to how much you can grow the pie. If you get too greedy at any stage, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a big piece of a small pie, or really ultimately, to change metaphors here a bit, there's no such thing as a small pie, because unless that pie reaches escape velocity, it turns into no pie at all.
Yeah, again, I want to unpack what you've just said, Yaniv, because I think it's one of the most fundamental things that any wannabe or early investors or founders need to understand. When you live in a scarcity market or in a market that doesn't understand venture capital, you think from traditional business terms that your goal is to own as much of the business as possible because that's how you get control and that's how you get the most dividends. It's like crazy town. It is a completely different business. The startup game is not about owning, and you've said this, Yaniv, but I want to say it very clearly. It's not about getting more of the pie. It's about taking that pie, which is a little pie sitting in front of you, and it's about pumping money and velocity and growth and value into that pie. So the pie becomes massive. It becomes the size of the country. And so you may own only 1% of that pie, but it is worth more than all the little pies sitting on all the little tables you could ever stuff into your mouth. That's the game. The game is to grow the value of the pie, not to take the pie. And this is true of founders as well. Founders, I find, when they come from traditional business or from scarcity thinking, they're like, well, I don't want to give away part of my pie, and I don't want to give away ESOP or equity to my employees. And what they're missing is you give everyone a piece of the pie, and then everyone is incentivized with their blood, sweat, and tears to make that pie as big as possible. And you get rich off the little slice you have left at the end of the dilution events.
When we talk about a cap table, by the way, for folks who are maybe on the less experienced end of things, a cap table is pretty much just a description of how that pie is divided up. And what you want is a balanced cap table, right? And by balanced, what it means is exactly what you said, Chris, is that everyone's feeling good about the position they're in. Once some of the stakeholders feel bad about their situation, feel like they've been screwed, then your pie's in trouble.
Maybe they're too inexperienced to know they've been screwed, but if the next sophisticated investor comes along, they know you've screwed them. And so you're then screwing yourself.
Right. And those investors aren't going to want to invest in an unbalanced pie.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
So let's talk about then what is a fair piece of the pie to sell and how to come up with that ask, that actual final number. We're in this section of the discussion is about crafting your ask, and we've given a lot of context here and a lot of what not to do's. But let's talk about how to craft the number and get to a piece of the pie that seems fair. So I talked about ambition. Have a big ambition, communicate that ambition clearly, help investors understand how you're going to get to the next round or the next round. Make sure that you're not trying to be grabby with the pieces that you're trying to buy or sell. How much is the right number? So the first thing is a lot of founders believe that they're trying to come up with a number that is small enough that they don't freak the investor out. And the first thing to know is, number one, it's not typically about one investor. We talked about having 2 or 3 or 4 investors who are going to invest in your round. That's something I see a lot of people miss. And number two, those smart investors, the smart money, are not looking for you to give them an ask that is as small as possible. They're looking for you to give them an ask that is commensurate with at least 18 months of effective, well-funded execution to grow the value of that equity. The words I said there are very important. Effective, high-growth execution. So it's not about raising enough to survive or to keep the lights on for the next 18 months. It's about what do you need to win? Because startups, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, software-powered startups are about having an unfair advantage and an incremental cost to serve. And that really only kicks in when you reach scale. And so you need enough money to take the oxygen out of the room from any wannabe players that are coming along and tinkering in the space. And you want to take the money to execute and win as fast as possible. And so your ask, and again, go back to signaling, your ask to a smart investor should be big enough that you're executing to win over the next 18 or so months. And if it's too small, you will actually sabotage the round. You will send the wrong signal to the wrong investor or to the right investor. And they will look at you and realize you're not a sophisticated operator who doesn't understand what they need to win.
We're at this point in our own capital raise at Circular, and it's really interesting. I think what you say is absolutely 100% correct from a theoretical point of view. I also think there are various aspects of reality that complicate the picture. And I guess I'm sort of turning to this as a student here now, as nearly sort of talking through this and getting some of your thoughts on this, Chris, because it's complicated, right? And I think maybe just to go to the very simple mathematical formula, we have 3 variables and 2 degrees of freedom, by which I mean, once you've decided 2 of the variables, the third one drops out of the maths. And the 3 variables are how much money you're looking to raise, what amount of dilution you're looking to take, And dilution is basically how much of the company you're selling, how big is that slice of pie. And the third is the overall valuation, which is how much is this thing worth altogether. And I think in the theoretical framework you put forward, some of these things are a little bit in tension with each other. We talked just before about having the balanced cap table. And so that means, for example, a typical seed or Series A round, the convention is you take about 20% dilution, 15 to 20%, give or take. And so that's in a sense a little bit fixed. If you take 40% dilution, that's going to cause trouble, not just for you, but for the whole company in the future. So that's somewhat constrained. And then there's how much money you need, which is a function of, as you put it, Chris, like what do you need to execute well for 18 months? And then there is the valuation, which is basically, if you do the maths, how much is the company actually worth if you just add up the value of all of its shares? Now, the way I've described it, you would nearly say, okay, if the target dilution is relatively fixed, the amount of capital you need to raise is relatively fixed, then the bit that floats is the valuation. And then that means the valuation just comes out in the wash once you've figured out with cooperative investors how much money you need. But the reality is that investors are sensitive to valuation, and there are good reasons for that, which we also just discussed, which is they need to be able to show a good return on their investment, and they need to therefore look forward to future rounds. And so these things are a little bit in tension with each other. The amount of money you need implies a valuation that investors are not necessarily comfortable paying. That's where it starts to get really interesting and where the dance begins. And like I said, I've got my thoughts on it, but I'm also actually in the middle of it. And as much as anything, I'm keen to hear your advice and your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think about it perhaps in a fairly simple way, and maybe it's a bit reductive, but I'm an abundance thinker, right? And I believe that you get to have a high degree of influence over the outcomes in your life. Not full influence, but a high degree of influence. The way you talk, the way you communicate, the way you articulate your ambition, the ask you craft, and the goals you set have a big degree of outcome in terms of the way investors respond to you and the valuation they're willing to tolerate from you and for your company, and so on and so forth. So I think about it in fairly simple terms, which is, what is my ambition? Where do I believe this company can go? What have I proven? And do I have a solid team of operators whose resume or their achievements in this business speak for themselves? And have I been able to articulate a compelling vision that I think people can rally behind and get excited about? And how much money do I need for the next 18 months of effective execution that is commensurate with all of the above? That's the number I'm raising. As far as I'm concerned, the only number that can wiggle around, and it has a limited set of wiggling, as you've said, is the piece of equity I'm selling, or as you said, the dilution I'm willing to take. And as you've said correctly, that number is relatively constrained. It's somewhere between 15 to 30%. That's the number you're selling. Now, if you're a goddamn rock star, third time exiting founder, maybe you can get that down to 10%. If you are a first time founder and you don't really know what you're doing and you're talking to some grabby investors, maybe that number floats up to 30, 35%. But the sweet spot, as you said, Yaniv, is 20. So as far as I'm concerned, the rest is figured out. I'm raising this much for this much runway. I'm selling 20% of the company, give or take a few percent here or there. The valuation comes out in the wash. You do the math. It's your job to tell a story and build a team and get the traction that justifies the amount you're raising and the next milestone you're trying to hit. And the rest is the rest. The rest is basically set.
That is how I like to think about it too. It is scary, right? And, I think part of it is because people talk about valuations as though there's some sort of real number. And in a very real sense, they're not. Like, you're illiquid. The valuation isn't really based on multiples, right? It comes out in the maths of what you've just described. And again, this blog article, we'll make sure it's in the show notes, the VC Should Play Bridge, makes this point explicitly, which is calling it valuation is misleading. In some technical terms, it's a valuation, but calling it a valuation implies that you have done some maths and placed this value on the company. Whereas really what you've said is, this is how much money I'm injecting into this company in order to give it 18 months runway, and I think I should own about 20% of it. That is what the smartest investors do. But, there is a sting in that tail, which is you need to really be able to convince them, whatever valuation falls out, that the next time you raise, it'll be at an even higher valuation. So you're creating a high expectation for yourself the more money you raise,
Yes.
Absolutely. And that comes down to how good your business is and how good you are at operating. So you really do need to back yourself.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say the sting in the tail is not just that you need to convince them, is that you need to deliver. And I think this show is at its best where it's contrasting Silicon Valley conventional wisdom with the rest of the world conventional wisdom, or, what you learned in school and traditional business with Silicon Valley style startups. And I think the backing yourself part is much easier. Let me maybe describe this in a political way. I think it's easier for white men in Silicon Valley coming from affluent parents. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to back myself. It's harder for people in underprivileged situations or that have historical disadvantages. And in markets where there's a scarcity of users, a scarcity of capital, and a scarcity of cultural permission to demand what you want from the world. But what I'm trying to convey through the tone of my voice, through content like this, is you get to control your destiny to a high degree. And part of that is to paint a clear vision for what you want, demand certain things from the world in a respectful and articulate way, and understand your value and to bet on yourself. The smartest money can tell when you're doing that in an authentic way, not in a braggadocious or arrogant or way that's disconnected from reality, but in a confident and principled way. And they will reward that by betting on you and betting on your journey and betting on your outcomes. And yes, that is way scarier to pitch. It's way scarier to live. It's way scarier to deliver on. But, in my way of thinking, you only have certain amount of life units to spend. And the game of true Silicon Valley style startups is to do those things I just said, to bet on yourself, to lean into the ambition, to lean into the abundance of the world, and to maybe put aside your actual or perceived limitations from your past, your culture, your race, your religion, your gender, and to lean into it, to use the Sheryl Sandberg term, and to push hard for big outcomes.
Yeah, I always think of those episodes from the TV show Silicon Valley. And by the way, if you haven't watched Silicon Valley, you should, because first of all, it's really funny, but also like any great satire, it pretty much skirts on the edge of the reality of the truth, right? There's a lot of truth you can get from it about this whole world. But anyway, there's the bit where they're raising money, and Ehrlich Bachman, who is your absolute, overconfident white male, starts to realize that the more arrogantly and offensively he treats the capitalists, the better the term sheets they give him. And while, again, it's satire, I think it does speak to your point, Chris, which is confidence, believing in yourself and asking for what you think you're worth can be really valuable. I do want to have a quick aside here because I think it's interesting, especially in at least 2021 was a very hot time for fundraising. And at that level, you can sometimes get the opposite effect, which is companies raising too much money, where you say, okay, I have 20% target dilution, and there are all these VCs basically bidding up my valuation. And in a sense, what that means is they're bidding up the size of the round that I'm raising. And so you end up with startups that raise more money than they can actually effectively deploy over that 18-month runway that you referred to, Chris. And it's nearly like the dog that caught the car. They get all this money and they're like, shit, now I've got to spend it. And the best case outcome is that they spend it wastefully and it just doesn't really help them. But that's actually the best case. The worst case, which is I think actually the more common case, is the extra money actually has a corrosive effect on the company's growth. It leads to distraction, it leads to poor hiring, to cultural erosion, and it makes the whole edifice a lot more shaky. So one of the things that I think is important, and actually in my recent experience is sort of under-discussed, is what is the amount of money that your organization can effectively deploy? So some of it is to do with the business circumstances, but some of it is to do with your internal team processes and culture. Because as we discussed in episode 3, I think it was, about scale-ups, the stress that is put on your organization when you're growing rapidly is immense. And if you are not ready for that stress, then it causes a lot of bad things to happen. So again, it's really saying the same thing here, but it's about right-sizing your raise. It shouldn't be too small. It also shouldn't be too big. And so you really want to be thinking carefully about what is the right amount of money that allows, again, in this cooperative game, all of us to build a hugely successful organization and get a great financial return on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that, of course. The thing is that the persona I have in my head, and I'll kind of be very transparent with the audience here, the persona I have in my head of people listening to these first 4, 5, 6 episodes are people that are more likely in the first camp. If you're living in Silicon Valley, X Stanford, XYC, X some outcome, X Uber, X Facebook, X PayPal, your problem is avoiding over-capitalizing and over-promising and under-delivering and running into down rounds and scale problems. I think if you're coming out of traditional business, traditional education system, traditional cultural reservations like tall poppy syndrome, I think you're just much more likely to be undershooting than overshooting. And in a global marketplace of, frankly, easy money and well capitalized, well networked, clever business model toting startups coming out of Silicon Valley and New York and Israel and London, you need to be playing this game well. And it's likely you need to raise your level of ambition, raise the amount of money you're asking for, raise the valuation by lowering the piece that you're selling and leaning into your story more. But you're absolutely correct that there is absolutely a way to overshoot that, and you need to be careful about that as well.
Yeah. And, I'm a little bit of a boomer when it comes to crypto. Like, I think there's something there, but I definitely have my reservations. And I think that's an example of it's simply a very hot space. So it's not even necessarily founders who come from a particular experienced background, but that there are just so many investors looking to bid things up in what's effectively a type of a gold rush, that valuations have gotten crazy and that round sizes have gotten crazy. I just saw another crypto NFT project that raised $25 million on a pre-seed. And it's like, what do they need all that money for? How are they going to spend it? How does that lead to the long-term health of that organization? And I just don't see it, right? I think they've raised that amount of money because they could. And that's dangerous. Even if you're actually quite a naive founder, but you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, that's where you need to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the crypto stuff is really almost entirely about momentum and entirely about signaling and entirely about hype and not about fundamentals, not about traction, not about any of that stuff. And so, they're almost using these rounds as just pure signaling and pure war chests. And there's a saying I've started seeing on Twitter, which is the Web 2.0 world, the pre-crypto world, which is really where most of you and I's experience is from, Yaniv, knew how to build products, but didn't necessarily know how to go and build community and build user bases. And the Web 3.0 world, the crypto world, know how to build hype and community, but they don't know how to build products. And frankly, I'd prefer the first than the second. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of opportunity for great product managers and great operators to participate in some of these projects, these crypto projects, and bring a level of discipline and operations and actual utility and value to the table. Because a lot of these are just going to evaporate the same way the .com startups did. And that's okay. I'm not judging that. I think that these hype curves come and go, and there's troughs of disillusionment, and people pick themselves up and learn and reconstitute themselves, and that's all fine. There's no need to gatekeep or lament that. But people are going to get hurt, and things are going to implode, and that's just the natural order of things. So I think this is our longest episode by far, but I think it's probably our most fun and contentious one.
I'm having fun.
But we should definitely wrap up now.
Yeah, so I guess part 2 of this series on fundraising is more about the how to actually do it. So, we've talked about how to signal yourself as a strong investment proposition. We've talked about the nuts and bolts of how to run a fundraising process and make sure that you give yourself ample opportunity to do a good raise. And then I think we've spent the most time, and it's been, for me, I think it's been really interesting and enjoyable, is to talk about how to craft your ask. And that means thinking about what it is you're asking for, what's important to explain to investors, and also where to stand your ground and to make sure that when you're asking for investment, that you're doing something that is in the long-term interest of the company, which ultimately is in the long-term interests of those investors, rather than just feeling that you have to negotiate yourself down and not ask for too much. So I hope that's useful. I'd love to actually start a discussion about this one, because I feel it's a really interesting one. I don't know how many actual VCs listen to this, but just to really talk about how it's viewed from the VC side and, what things we've said you might slightly disagree with. It would be really interesting to have that discussion.
Absolutely. So don't forget to jump in the comments if you're a founder or a VC, as Yaniv said. Also suggest what we might cover next. We're really looking for suggestions from the audience. We'd really like to give you guys what you need and what you want from this show. Don't forget to follow us on all the socials, all the social media. You can find the Startup Podcast on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. So join us there. And of course, as always, please subscribe and rate the podcast on whatever app you're listening to us on. It helps us a huge amount, feeds the algorithm and feeds our ego, and keeps everything rolling in a virtuous cycle.
I think this is so important. We're really doing this to provide value. And the way that you, our early listeners, can help is really around these ratings and reviews. I think especially on Apple Podcasts, it's just to take a little bit of time out and write an honest review.
Wait. Maybe not an honest review. If you're positive and like what we're doing, write an honest review. If you don't like what we're doing, please just stay silent.
Just stop listening.
Stop listening, exactly. All right, awesome, Yaniv. Thanks. This has been fun as always, man.
Thanks so much, Chris.
See you guys in the next one.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.